So today's track is going to be from Skyrim V. That's right. And it's going to be called Awake or Awake. And it's by Jeremy Soule from Skyrim V. And this is like one of the first tracks that play in the game during the intro where they're like, "Oh, you're finally awake." Like that whole moment. Um and what we're going to do is I'm going to play it through. It's only a minute 30 seconds, but there's actually a lot of really cool um I think balance between the melody and then the orchestration and the string section, and then also the percussion and the low strings. So lots of pretty cool stuff going on here, and I think it'll be a fun track to kind of talk a little bit about. Even though it's like really short, there's a lot of really good orchestration. So without further ado, let's play it through. I will try my best to not talk during the first playthrough. Like this build up right here. Ah, so good. And check out this key change right here from G minor to C minor. It's so good. Just the balance in general, I think. And also the restraint in instrumentation is really nice. There's really not a whole lot of brass presence. So, let's run it through with a more analysis kind of view now, okay? So basically, it is also something to note real quick before we talk about anything else. This song, a lot of Skyrim's original soundtrack is actually it's in a tuning of A equals 446.5 hertz. So normal standard Western tuning in terms of like orchestral stuff, usually it's at 440 hertz, like A equals 440. In Skyrim, they actually have the tuning up a little bit, up 2.5 hertz, from 4.4 to 6, right? And the reason for it, I honestly don't know. It makes it feel very different, I think. It does pitch things up slightly. Um, I have heard, like, Everadic mentioned this before a while back, but it kind of maybe could help maybe balance the low end of the sound versus, like, the sound design that goes on, because there is a lot of ambient noise and stuff in Skyrim, and by changing the pitch frequency to, like, this 440.6, 446.5 hertz tuning, it kind of, like, separates it from, like, I guess, maybe the real world? I don't know if that makes sense. But I don't know. It does sound interesting though when you do like tuning changes like that. So something to note. Um, the tuning here is, or the tempo is pretty slow. It says infinite equals around 45 BPM. That's what the squiggly lines mean basically. When you have that, so it means like give or take 45 BPM. And it is in 4/4 time. So again, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's pretty standard in that sense. It starts out in the key of G minor. So we have two flats, B flat and E flat. And you'll notice that one thing that's pretty common with Skyrim music is that Jeremy Soule rarely does dominant chord function, and when he does, it's to close out a section and go into a new section usually. And you can actually see how he does that through this part here, right? It goes G sus4 to G, and then he kind of modulates it. He takes the he takes the tonic rather, which is currently G minor because we're in the key of G minor. And he actually uses that as a way to pivot away because the cadence here is a 4 minor chord to the 1 minor, which is C minor to G minor. And he kind of goes back and forth with this cadence, and then he brings in that flat 6, flat 7, like that very popular Star Wars cadence too. And then it goes G sus4 to G natural, which then goes to C minor in the next closing scene, or theme rather. So it's I think it's a pretty cool way to kind of like move away from like kind of repeating chord progression and kind of push it forward. So it's like we start in C, then it goes to G, C minor, G, E flat major 7, F major, G sus4, G, and then back to C minor. So it's pretty cool. Because when you modulate to C minor, then you have an A flat in there, which means your F major chord that was here, that gets changed up completely and then becomes like a F minor chord. So total different sound palette in the later section, which is pretty cool. So, in terms of orchestration, your melody here is played in a solo French horn. Um, Pretty much the whole way through this section. And it's kind of in a phrasing of like, this bar here where it plays like this G natural, where it's like dum, dum, D, up to C, down to G, then it goes up. So he's kind of keeping like that heroic kind of vibe where it's just playing like a G natural, G natural, G natural again. Then it goes up to that C. And if you're going from G to C, up, that is a perfect fourth. So some really cool like heroic movement here. Then it goes back down. Then it goes up a minor third to that B flat from the G natural again. So you can really see that he's playing things extremely diatonic, right? Your upper strings here are playing a high C5. They're playing an E flat 4 and then a C4 as well underneath that in the violins and violas. And then underneath that, you have the French horn just kind of sitting in right here. So basically, the low end of the orchestra doesn't really come in until this point here, right? Which is pretty cool, I think. Um, Now it says horn here. What I'm assuming happens is you have a French horn player playing the first chunk here, and then the third player or second or whatever the section starts playing some harmony. So you kind of have like this G natural and E flat kind of working together to kind of stabilize the rhythms. Because the French horn jumps from G to C to then G again, and the way that kind of balances out is by having another French horn player play that low E flat as a pedal tone, all kind of way through here. But it's not really a pedal tone. It's more like an interlocking voice that sits underneath the melody. So it goes that E flat, and then it descends down to the D natural. Then it goes to C, and then the cellos come in. Because remember, the job of the French horns in the orchestra, your job is to, one, balance the woodwinds to the brass to the strings, and it's just to kind of create like a glue, right? And the way that Jeremy Soule does that is to bring in the cellos. He has the bass and timpani right here, but the way the cello's introduced is by actually having the French horns introduce them, which is really cool, I think. Because then you're kind of going from like this French horn sound to then this like nice cello section that's kind of like devisied in here underneath that balances the upper strings with the middle horn section. So it's pretty cool stuff. You do have counter melody here. So the way movement is introduced is when the French horn's not playing like the half note and then the quarter notes. What happens melodically is you have your half notes and dotted half note here. Whenever so the whole note's up top here, then the string player violas play this C natural, E flat, C back to C again. Again, just outlining the tonality of the piece. There's not a whole lot of non-chord tones in this because it's supposed to have a very like bold and powerful kind of sound. And if we play it through maybe from here to here, you'll kind of see what I mean about like in terms of diatonic chords and not playing non-chord tones. It really makes it just feel a bit more like confident, right? Because this is like this entire point of this track is to introduce you to Skyrim V. And at this point, you don't want it to be super like ambitious in terms of like your chord quality and things like that, because it's just trying to be like, okay, look, we're playing Skyrim. This is the game. Enjoy the ambience you're seeing. You're seeing the game for the very first time, and it's just trying to like support you through that. And the visuals are enough to make you feel a little bit overwhelmed, right? You're like, what's going on? And you don't want the music necessarily to kind of make it feel confusing, right? So if you listen to from here up to here, we can kind of hear how the horns and the strings kind of function. So without further ado, here we go. So if we listen through, you can hear the string movement. Right here, there's that triplet. Then the upper E flat comes in on the first violin, that then causes the movement to go descending down, essentially. Pretty crazy. And then we're back to that C. Pretty cool stuff. And then before we continue that part, there's some things to talk about with this part here. Yo, when does the horse carriage come in the comments? The composition. Yeah, isn't there like I think it's at this point where your character like wakes up and the horse carriage comes in, where he's like, "Hey, you're finally awake." Yeah, that's funny. Dude, this is making me want to play Skyrim again. We did it for the first time like a while back, but it's true. Um, yeah, so at this point, it's I think most of this piece is still pretty much just like pretty much just I don't know if there's much visual stuff on the screen because I don't think you actually see anything until this point. So it's kind of giving you a little bit of hype, like, ooh, what's coming next, kind of thing. Um, so yeah, you can see though if you view the string section chat is your different layers. This is layer 3, background element. Layer 2, your kind of movement that fills in the measure in terms of like rhythmic structure. And then this is like your layer 1, your melody, right? Um, so if you think of it this way, you can really see kind of how it functions because you have some movement here that's creating like a little bit of just not a whole lot, by the way. It's just a triplet at the end on beat 4 that then goes into the whole note. So they go from a little bit of movement here in beat in bar 1. Bar 2 comes in, everything's unison. Then measure 3 comes in, and at this point, the French horn goes up that perfect fourth, and then down a fourth, and then up to the minor third, descending down. So what happens is then your French horn gets added in here, plus French horn, to now play in a minor third interval and create some like grounding, like a nice grounding tone to introduce the cello in the next few bars. And that's why when you're thinking about orchestration and developing melodies and things like that, it's really important to not think about just this measure to this measure. You need to think about this phrase here all the way to this phrase right here, right? Because this is kind of a 4 bar phrase. Or sorry, not 4 bar. It's like 3 bars that's split into different groups. And you can see that here, right? Group 1, group 2, group 3, and then here's the cadence out to the outro. So what happens is essentially you have this like kind of melody that's introduced, pushes up in the upper registers, comes back down, then goes up again, goes back down. Then you take this pattern here on your third time around, and this is when you kind of change it up to kind of reflect into this part, but now for more of an outro sound. Because, like, take note how essentially this goes from G, C, G to B flat, but this time when it does these intervals rhythmically, it's the same rhythms. It actually drops down from F natural to C, then up a major second to D natural. So instead of ending on like a G natural or a B flat, it actually goes straight down to the lower notes. Um, which is a really nice way to close out the cadence, essentially. Um, so for unusual or uncommon slash unconventional instruments, would you chart the same way or have a specialized note taking? Um, I guess it depends on the instrument. But usually, if let's say you had like I don't know, let's say you had a Duke playing at this top line, if I understand the question right, um, you would kind of just notate it as like how traditional the Duke notation would be, if that makes sense. Um, yeah. Unless it's some instrument that requires like weird instrumentation, usually it kind of falls in this kind of standard notation, if that makes sense. Um, so yeah, so another cool thing too is when the melody kind of goes here to this dotted quarter, eighth note to then the half notes, your string section is playing root fifth and thirds. Or sorry, root fifth, root again. Um, Sorry, not root fifth root. It's playing fifth root fifth because it's D natural, G natural, D right here. And what's happening is the B flat is playing underneath that in your horns. So the idea is that you're kind of grounding this texture under here to descend down. So when you play the tonic of G minor right here on beat 3 and 4, you have your other section of the orchestra kind of support that by playing every tone except for the one that the horn's playing. So right here, the special notes is B flat and D natural because the G natural is played here, and it's supported an octave above within the string section right there. So again, you can really see how a lot of the doublings within the orchestra in this piece are not doubling the French horn 1 to 1. They're kind of playing an octave above or below it because they're trying to make sure that the soloist in this piece can really project as much making sure that it sounds like a soloist. Because if you have like I don't know, let's say you had the other French horns doubling the solo horn here, that would just be a horn section. And then if you have a string doubling that stuff, it would just not really blend as nicely. So it's creating space so they can kind of sit in that comfortable horn range. So pretty cool. And you can see for the rest of the orchestration here, the string section really just guides along the descending line of the horn and just supports it. Um, like here, they introduce the E flat and E flat up top in octaves on the viola and violin one. The second violin's playing G natural, kind of like this pedal sound throughout here. And then the other violins are just playing in octaves with the violas. And then the French horns here are also being supported by that kind of because you have a minor six interval between the G and the E flat, as well as you kind of have unison playing down on beat 3, and then it goes back to that minor 6 interval again when it goes to the E flat up top here and balancing to that low G natural. So again, it's just really harmonizing it while your other instruments here are just playing the roots in octaves. And then sometimes they'll play like the fifth scale degree as well in the bass. Um, so in general, an important thing to think about when you're doing kind of this kind of orchestration is to create room in your low end, create like a pad kind of sound in your upper range, and use that as a way to harmonize with subdivisions of your rhythms to support the main leading melody throughout here. Um, so pretty cool stuff. And that same thing happens here as well in this outro, where it goes to the E flat major 7, F major, and then to the G sus 4. Because remember, it's in groups of threes, the melody. Group 1, group 2, and then group 3 is right here. And then here's your outro cadence. So this is kind of a bar that brings things out to the next section. So it's kind of like an A and a B. That's kind of the entire song. And you can also think about the orchestration as something that starts out more minimal and then picks up as the entire piece goes on. And again, that's why I mentioned before, it's really important to think about when you're developing melodies and themes. Don't think about one measure to the next. Think about your overall arcing picture and then how that develops in a larger scheme. Don't think just one measure to the next. Think about how do I get this chunk here to transition to the next idea over here. And how do you create like a nice swell and just developing sound in general. So that's why I think creating sketches, sure, are like useful and helpful for that type of stuff. But also I think that probably your best bet too is just to be thinking about your melodic shape and think about how your orchestration just supports that. And also the kind of vibes you're going for, right? Because with Skyrim, you kind of had the gameplay and the story to go off of in terms of story making. But even though if you're not working on Skyrim V or something, you can still kind of come up with your own story and narrative, right? Especially in music that's like our own projects. And that's kind of the fun part about composing is we can kind of like, if it's like a personal project we're working on, you can kind of come up with your own story. So even if you're doing something that's like a song you're just practicing your orchestration on, try and figure out a story or words or poetry, or you could take a screenshot from a video game, anything like that, and it's a really good way to try and like make sure your music has something it's based on. Try and think about like if you were to show your music to someone and they said, "What's this? What's the story of this?" You could be able to describe that. And I think that whether we're making video game music or film or concert music or electronic music, anything, it's cool to have like a purpose for it. And I think that even with like if you look at like pop music or like EDM, even the entire point of EDM is like dance music, right? If you write music that's like rave stuff, it's designed to be listened to in raves. So there's like a intention for it, right? And like some pop music, it all has like stories that it's based on as well. So I think that with classical composition or orchestral stuff in general, anything to do with music, we should always try and have something that it's based on. It's a really helpful tool in trying to figure out what our music should try and sound like. So yeah, because that's kind of our goal as musicians, right? Is to kind of tell story. And I think that's an important thing to think about when we're kind of, it's easy to think about the technical stuff like chords and different things like that, but I also think it's an important starting place to like have an idea. So yeah, sorry, I'm just yapping, chat. My bad. That's my rant. Okay, so now let's go to this cadence right here, okay? So here's this E flat major sound. Again, it goes up, descending down, then up that major second. And then the orchestration builds up to this point and then plateaus, thins out. And the way he does that is by bringing in flute and English horn now. And what's really cool about this section, this is where he goes from octaves to also this minor 6 interval again. So English horn and flutes are playing with the strings. French horns are cut out completely, by the way. You have a pad playing C in the pedal tone with the upper part here playing G. So it's just root and fifth playing as a pedal tone. And then a similar things going on here in your other strings, like violins and violas, where they're just doing this constantly kind of descending pattern from C natural to B flat, C natural, B flat, then down to G. And you can really see how it's kind of like has like these different layers too, right? Because layer 3, layer 2 is kind of grounding support, and then you have your other instruments here that kind of support the main melody coming in to this violin 1 and flute and English horn to kind of play in like this more harmonized kind of voicing. And the reason why I think English horn was chosen is because English horn blends really nice with French horns. And I think that if you're trying to cadence away from that horn sound, the English horn really does work nicely in that kind of lower range. It has a very nice, it has a very horn quality to it, if that makes sense. So, yeah, pretty cool stuff. Again, you can see it's like a minor 6 interval here. Then they go to octaves. Then it goes back down to octaves. Um, then it's still playing octaves here until this point. Now it's playing the fifth of G minor up top with a G natural there. So it's playing D up top, and then it's playing a G octaves below that. So you kind of have like this, like, what would that be? Like a 10th interval or something. Pretty cool wide voicing that then goes up nicely here. It goes back up a minor 6. This goes down a major 2nd, and then kind of goes back to that minor 6 interval that then pushes back up to octaves and then closes out where it's just playing, you know, C, G, 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 and then G again with C. So it's really actually kind of crazy here is it's a G minor chord with a pedal of C, except there's no third interval in this. So you actually can't really tell the chord quality at this point. You can't tell if it's major or minor, which I think is really clever because at this point in the game, you're like in the horse carriage thing, what Emmett was mentioning earlier, and you're about to be basically killed, I believe, at the chopping block, right? So you're not sure what's gonna happen really. And I think that by having this not a major or minor chord without the third interval there, it kind of gives you this sense of like what's about to happen. Um, so yeah, pretty cool stuff. That is the Skyrim Awake analysis chat. Hope it was helpful. And definitely, if you have any questions, feel free to post in the comments and like and subscribe. Let's go.